Welcome back to the SSAS and MDX training sessions. In last session, we discussed about dimension tables and the fact tables and how to identify a dimension table and the fact table. The shortest or the blind mark is like if it is any textual information, and that typically falls into your dimension, and if it is metric information, that falls into your fact table. So if you see here, this description, though it is in fact table, this can't be used as your metric. Description can't be your metric. It's not something key performance indicator for your business. So similarly, there may be some integer fields in your dimension tables, like for example, tax rate and all. So these can be, or unit price, these can be your dimensions, or you can make it as a dimension, but it's not going to help. It's not going to help in analyzing your business. And similarly, you can have this description. You can have a metric on top of this description, like first value, last value, max value, min value, something like that. But the problem is that's not going to help in any way or the best way to analyze your business. Okay. So we have a star schema here. We also discussed about the star schema and snowflake schemas in last session. And we have a star schema to work here. First, let's set some requirement. What is the requirement for the cube design or cube development here, SSAS cube project? Let's say the requirement is to see the sales by employee and by customer. So if you try to find out the tables that are required for to meet the requirements, for example, the requirement set is to see the sales by employee and customer. From the list of tables that are on my screen, you can easily figure out which table has employee information. So employee has employee information, and customer has customer information, and these two has relationship, and sales has the sales information, like quantity, unit price, or tax rate. And main thing is profit, and profit. Okay. These three tables are required to meet my requirements. Do I need the remaining tables? I actually don't require these tables, and it's not going to harm if it is one or two tables in excess in your data source view. But if you don't want it, better remove it. Now I have enough tables that are required to create to meet the requirements given by the user. Now, before going with the creation of the dimensions and the facts and try to generate the report that user has given as a requirement, we see some properties that we have in the data source view, which is very important. Data source view. This is your data source view, and data source view is nothing but the collection of objects, typically tables or views or named queries. And if you right click on the empty pane here, you see some set of properties. Similarly, set of properties on right mask of the table. Similarly on column, and which has defined the primary key, and the column which does not have the primary key. There are set of properties, set of options that you can use. First, let's see what are the options that we have on right mask of on the empty pane of the data source view. If you see here, the first one is new named query. So this is a very important interview question. So what is named query in data source view? So named query is nothing but a table or a select statement or a view in data source view. What generally a view is in SQL Server? In SQL Server, a view is nothing but a select statement or a virtual one on top of your physical. For example, let me go to SQL Server Management Studio. Yep, it's opening. And let me go to the database. Our database is wide world import as DW. So let me take any table here. There is a schema for this. I think fact is the schema, if I'm not wrong. So this is a table. This is an object. This is a physical object. It has some pages allocated in your SQL Server. Now you can create a virtual one on top of it, which we call it as view, right? Create view dummy as any valid select statement. So if I execute it, it creates a virtual on top of the physical one. Now I can use this dummy to to pull the data from fact.sale table. So this is a view. There are many reasons for creating views, many advantages. In view, you can join multiple tables and you can expose the columns that are required for a particular set of users. Or you can create views on top of every table and with a schema, and you can give access to a set of users. So there are, I mean, if you go to SQL concepts, there are a lot of advantages of having views, and there are multiple types of views. But here, what we need to understand is just a virtual one. There is no physical pages or space allocated for the views in your SQL Server. Now, creating a view in the data source view is called as named query, which means, let's say this is my table. Out of these, I need only few columns, let's say sales key, or in the example that we are working on, we need to see employee-wise, customer-wise sales information, right? So what columns are required for to meet that particular requirement? Employee key is something I want. Let me see, employee key, maybe salesperson key. Let me see what is the key here. Yeah, it's a salesperson key. And I need a customer key, and I need a profit. So these three are more than enough to meet the requirements given by the user. They want to see the profit, okay, by salesperson or by the employee and by the customer. Now I can create a view in the data source view, which we also call as named query. So just select the option and give some name, sales data, and you can use this pane. This is similar to the one in SQL Server, where you can add the objects by selecting this and select the columns that you want and ignore the columns, and the SQL query will be generated automatically at the bottom. So this is one way of doing. For example, if I select sales, if you see here, select from sales is taken, and what I need is customer key. You see the column is added. Similarly, I need salesperson key, and I may need a couple of, let's say, quantity and tax rate and unit price and total excluding tax, tax amount, and profit, and total including tax. I added a couple of columns and click on OK. So this will create a table object, which is a view on top of the data source view on the data source. Now this view will not be reflected to your underlying database. What is your underlying database in this case? Wide world inventors, or let's say wide world importers.dw. If you go and look for the sales data table or view, you will not find it. That's the advantages of data source view. Whatever you do here will be limited or will be restricted or will be up to the data source view only. So whatever you create here in the data source view, or whatever you modify, or whatever you add in the data source view, will be only limited to the data source view. It won't go back to the underlying data source. Now, do I need this table? This has a lot of columns which I don't need to meet the requirements. So I can remove this. I can use this data source view. And there are many other advantages too. I can define my own primary key here. I can define my relationships. I can define, I can create calculated columns on it. Or I can join multiple tables to get data from other tables too. Like for example, if you go and edit it, you can add multiple tables, which has some relationship. For example, let me take, as an example, let me take date. These two guys has relationship. How these are related, you can see here. Inner join on delivery date key to dim date, and you can pull one or two columns from the other one too. And if you execute it, you can see the data. Let me take the select statement and see what it has taken. Start dim date table and fact sales inner join dimension dot dim date on fact dot invoice date key is equal to dimension dot date dot date. I don't think it's on date key. It may be something date key, or how these two are related. Let me check that. Let me execute it. And you see the data is coming, and the data is coming from both fact table and from the dimension table. So the advantage, whatever you can create in the view, you can use the same in your data source view named query. It's kind of view in the data source view. So now here, if you see, I deleted the table. You can keep the sales table, or you can use the shortened table instead of a wide table which has 1,000 or 100 or 150 columns. You can shorten the table if you don't want. There are two ways in doing that. One is create a view in your SQL Server or your underlying database, and limit the columns that you want, or create a named query. When you will go with named query and when will you go with view? You can create view. View is better compared to the named query in performance, and you can have indexes and all those advantages that are there with the view. But the problem is, not everyone will give access to you to create views in the data source. For example, you are building a cube on top of a database XYZ. They'll give you access to set of tables that are required for creating the analysis service cube. But if you don't have the permissions to create views, you cannot limit the columns. You have to pull all the columns into your table, right? So the other option is create a data source view. This is your project. You will have complete access here. You can do whatever you want in the data source view. You can create a named view, and you can limit the 10 or 15 columns that you need out of 150 columns, and use the named query instead of using the table. So the next question will be like, which one is better, the view or the named query? If you ask me, the view is better in many ways. The first one is it's on the SQL side, and it will have will have a very much better control. You can go and modify the view and point to a different column if you want on the fly, instead of opening the Visual Studio and making the changes here and deploying the project, SSAS project, and so on. You can simply go and modify it, and you can have indexes if it is a view in the SQL Server, so that if the performance is not good, you can improve the performance. And finally, improve the performance. Those are the advantages, few advantages that we have on the on creating view in the SQL Server side. Now, if you see creating the named query, the main advantage is you will have control. If you don't have access to your underlying database for creating new objects, then you will be left with only one option, that is creating a named query. If you want to restrict the number of columns from a table, or if you want to restrict, or if you want to join 3-4 tables and you want to denormalize it before using it in your fact table, as a fact table or as a dimension table. Now, this is about named query. Let's see the next options we have here. The second one is add or remove tables. Let's say, for example, you created this project and you deployed, and it's all running good. Users are happy, they're using it. After a few months, users come up with a new requirement to add a new column or new table from the database and add it as part of the cube, so that they want to analyze data that is coming from the table. So in that case, you have to come here and you have to add a new table or remove an existing table. Here it's showing only two tables because these two are the only objects that we have in the data source view, whereas another one is the named query which we created in the data source view that can be removed using this wizard. Now, let's say the requirement says users want to see the data by city also, sales data by city. Now you have to come here, you have to use this option, take it, and click on OK. Now you'll get another table, the city table. This is how you can use this option, add or remove tables, to add or to remove any object from the data source view. Now the relationship. This option, you'll find this option in many places in the same data source view. The first one is here, new relationship, or if you right click on a column, you can see new relationship, or if you right click on a table, you can see new relationship. And where else you can see? I think somewhere here you'll have an option to give the relationship, if I'm not wrong. Yep. Here, if you see new relationship, if you click, it will do the same. So what is the option new relationship? If you want, yesterday you asked one question, like, is it mandatory to have foreign key relationships defined in your database? Yes, it is always good to define foreign key relationship, which will avoid inserting orphan records. Okay, that helps in avoiding. It helps in taking care of orphan records, and we can't insert orphan records into the system. Now, most of the databases, they don't maintain the relationship. If they don't maintain the relationship, it looks like this. If you add tables, one will be here, one will be here, one will be here, and one will be here, and there is no relationship between each object here. Now you can use this option, right click and new relationship, to give the relationship. Now let's see how to give the relationship. And here they have given some hint. The destination is the primary key table, which means your master table, or in other words, your dimension table. And here it's a foreign key table, which means your transaction table or your fact table. So sales data is my fact table now, because I created a named query on top of sales table, fact sales table. What column I want to use, customer key, how it is related, and to which table or which object. This is related to customer, to the customer key. And if I click on OK, this sets the relationship. Though the relationship was not available, you can create the relationship. Even without creating relationship, you can proceed with the development of the cube, but this helps you. I'll show you where this is going to help. The best data source view that you can create, the better it is, and it's going to help you in many ways. Analysis services will take care of so many jobs that you have to do manually if you don't design your data source view properly. This relationships is one among those. I remember working on a project where there was 100 tables in my data source view, and none of the tables were related. And I had to spend a lot of time in giving relationships while building the cubes. But now, if you define the data source view properly, that's gonna reduce a lot of work from you. I'll show you that. I'm not gonna give relationship to the employee, to the fact table, but I'm gonna give relationship between city and sales data. I'm not giving to employee just to show you what kind of pain you have to go through if you don't define your data source view properly. Let's see how these two are related. There may be a key column city key, and in my data source view, this named query does not have the city key. So what I can do here is go back and add the city key and click on OK. The city key will be here. Okay. Now you have seen how to add relationship by using the option on right masking on the empty pane. So here you have to select both the tables. Instead, if you select the table here and select the new relationship, this will do the job for you. It will select the table for you by default. That's the only difference in selecting the new relationship option outside the table and on the table, right? One step reduced. You can you don't need to pick the table. And if you do the same on column, this is going to do two steps for you. Select the table and select the column here. But remaining steps you have to take it. The destination table is city and the key is city key. Now the relationship is set, right? And if you select the relationships here, it's again as same as clicking the relationship or selecting the relationship option from here. Now let's see the next option we have here. Show friendly names. It is checked already. So friendly names is for the objects that we have here. And if you see the table, this looks little better. Employee, city, you can understand the table. And if you uncheck this, it gives you the schema as well as the table and whatever the table name it is. For example, sales data, this is good, and this schema will be shown here. In few cases, the table names will be pretty odd. IJK underscore sales underscore B23 underscore something. But actually the meaning of that one is fact sales. So if you give any name, if you go to the properties here, there is an option called friendly name. If you give a name like city info, this will be your friendly name. If I check this show friendly names, it will show the city info. So to give meaningful names to the objects based on the data that is having, this show friendly names is a useful option. And particularly when you have tables that is pulled from different systems, and the tables are, let's say if the tables are coming from legacy systems or old databases, the table names will be pretty odd. So in that case, this show friendly names option will be useful. And next one is select all. I don't know why he has given this option here. If you select all, it will select everything. That's it. Instead, you click here and you do Control A, it selects everything. So it's not a big option or to have in your right mask on the data source view. And find table. When you have hundreds of tables, this find table really helps. If you want to find a table, for example, I don't know where the sales is, filter it. I get the sales. If I double click on it, it will go and highlight the table. So find table, you also find it here. The same one, find table, is the same option. If you double click on anything, it will go and highlight it. It really helps when there are lots of tables. Now it's only 4 tables. You can easily see that. Let me save this data source view and let me do something for you. Let me add everything, and it added everything. Now you don't know where the table is. So in that case, if you go here and if you can see the sales, find or else search for sale and search for sale data, it will take you there, right? So this is a useful option when there are many tables in the data source view. Now I don't want all those tables. I'm discarding it. I closed it and I'm discarding it so that it will not be saved. Let me go back to the data source view, which will have my old set of tables. Let's go to the next option, arrange tables. Now I drag these tables, right? And then I have given relationships. Now if I select this arrange tables, these tables will be arranged in the best possible look and feel. So if you see, this is the central table, that is fact table. It has relationship to these two, and this is orphan. There is no relationship. If I set relationship to the other one too, then it arranges in a better way. So now I'm giving relationship to the employee. Oops, by mistake I set it as primary key. New relationship, and if I select employee key, now this is how it looks. Now if I arrange tables, it arranges in a better way, the star schema, because every dimension table is directly related to your fact table. But as I said, I don't want to give this relationship for now. Leave it like this. I have just given to show the option arrange tables. Now switch to diagonal layout. There are two types of layouts. This is a rectangle layout. Everything is placed in a rectangle format. If you switch to diagonal layout, it looks diagonal. Few people are favorites to the diagonal layout. So for them, this layout, and for people like me, it's a rectangle layout, which will have a better look and feel, in my sense. Okay, and refresh. This is we will revisit this. This is a key thing. This is very important in modifying the projects or in bringing the changes from your SQL. We will discuss this one later. And zoom, you can zoom it to fit, or you can zoom it to 200%. It's all like if you want to see, if you want to zoom in or zoom out, you can use the zoom option. For now, I'll set it to default or default 100%. It looks like this, or better, set it to fit. To fit means how many objects I add, it will fit in this page. If you want to see that, let me save this again. Let me add all the tables. And it will decrease the size of the objects, okay? It will decrease the size of the objects, but it will try to fit in one single page. You see here, it's all the objects are here, but it fit into one page, and but you can't see the table name clearly, right? Even if you increase it has taken only the table name, but it's not showing any columns. So that is a zoom option you have. Let me discard it again. Okay, let me arrange the tables. And properties, these are the properties of the data source view. Like if you want to give some name change or data source, this is the data source you opted for. If you have a different data source, you can change the data source too. And retrieve relationships, true or false. If there are any relationships, you want to retrieve that, or if you set it to false, it won't retrieve the relationships. But it's good to have true. And schema restrictions, you can give some schema which you want to restrict with a comma separator. So this is about the properties or options that we have on the data source view, right mask on the empty pane in the data source view. Now let's quickly see the properties that we have in the right mask off on the table. So you have an option called new named calculation. When I right click on the table, I see an option called new named calculation. When I right click on the named query, I don't see that option. We'll discuss why we don't have the option here and why we have this option here and what this option is. So the new named calculation, if you have a table and if you want to add or calculate or derive something from the table column data, then you can use this. For example, new named calculation, you have to give the name dummy, and if I give expression as 1, it's taken, and you can see a calculator icon, which means it's a named calculation. And if I export the data, if I explore the data, you can see it placed 1 for every row. So these are nothing but a derived column. Okay, if you have an idea about SSAS, you know what expressions you can give to derive a new column. Let's say, for example, what data we have in the category, or let's see any data. You have a customer, you have bill to customer, you have category, and you have primary contact. Okay, let's change something to the primary contact. Let's create a new named calculation, which means new column derived from the other columns or derived by hard coding some values. So I'm naming it as derived name, and I'm going to use the column primary contact, and if I explore the data, you see the primary contact is Waldemar Pfizer, and you'll have the same name here in the derived name. Now you can make some changes to that. For example, this is our derived column. I can either double click or right click and edit the name of calculation, and I can give it as my name is. I can try to, invalid column name. I forgot. It should be single quotes. So my name is whatever the name that is coming from there. Now let's see, this is the primary contact name, and if you see the derived name, my name is so and so. Let's say you have a first name and the last name and the middle name in 3 different columns. You can concatenate and you can derive it to a new column called full name, right? That is an use case for this derived column, and I mean this named calculation, and you can create many named calculations. For example, if you have a sales amount and tax amount, if you want to multiply those two, then if you want to multiply those two, then you can derive a column from that. Okay, so that is the derived column. That's the named calculation here. Now, why the named calculation is not showing on the sales data, which is a named query? The reason is, if you want to create any such column, any derived column, or any named calculation on a named query, you don't need a named calculation option. The reason is, you can directly edit the query and you can place whatever you want in the SQL. You have that control. When you have that control, why you need an option called named calculation? For example, if I say 1 as new column. And if I click on OK, a new column is added. And if I explore the data, same like the customer dummy column, you can see it's placed 1 at the for every row in the table. So that is the reason the named calculation is not available on the data, so on the named queries in the data source view, because you can create n number of columns instead of having the option. I mean, instead of using the named calculation option. Now let's see the next option. We have already seen the new relationship option. There is an option called replace table. So if you don't want to use table and but you want to select all the columns from it, see there is an option to create a new named query just by right clicking here, new named query, and give the select statement. The pain is you have to add the table and you have to do all these things, blah blah blah. Instead you have an option, right click, replace the table with the named query. Because I want to replace employee with the named query, it will do the job for you. And you simply come here and take out, for example, the employee ID, maybe photo, and some key. I don't want all these things. I just need only these 4 fields. Then this has become now a named query. So I converted a table into a named query by using the option replace table with named query. The advantage, instead of going for the direct named query option, is and by going to this is it selects the table that you want to edit, and you can just simply make the changes, whatever the columns you want, and you can add, you can leave those columns, and you can remove the remaining columns. Similarly, the option you have here, another option is when you have replace table, you cannot replace table with another named query because this is already a named query. With other table, you can do what table you want to replace with. If I want to replace it with employee, I can select it and you can see my employee table is back. So it's switching between the named query and the employee table. Now you have 2 calculations here. What's going to happen if I replace it with a named query? Am I going to get those 2 calculations? So if you see here, you see that new calculations are also added as part of your named query, and those 2 columns are now the calculator icon has been taken because named queries will not have the named calculations, but the functionality is still there, right? That is one good thing in replacing the table with the named query. If you want to replace the table with the named query without losing the columns that you have created, you can use this option. This is a good option. So that is the options we have. And explore data, we have already seen that it will give you the sample data here in the table format, and you can see what kind of data is coming on in a particular column of the. Now let's quickly see the column options. Set logical primary key or delete logical primary key is an option. If you, let's say for example, if you create a named, if you have a named query, and if you know what columns will form uniqueness to the entire row, then you can create the primary key. It doesn't make much difference having the primary key, but as I mentioned, it's going to help a little bit in your while designing the dimensions. Let's see an example. This is a named query. I can delete this if I don't want, or I can add this if I want. Let's say for example, I'm going to delete this. I'm not going to set the primary key for this, just for a reason, to show how it's going to impact your dimension design. When you're designing the dimension, what extra step that you have to do and system will not do for you. Okay. So this option is to remove or set the logical primary key, and explore data is something which we have already seen. Now let's see if there are any options in the table. There is no extra option. So these are the different options that we have in the data source view. And the only option that we have not discussed is refresh. We will discuss about refresh now. And also we will revisit it after we design the cube, because this is very important option we have in the data source view. So before going to the refresh option, let's quickly see one button here. If you observe the button in the specify relationship wizard, there is a reverse option. For example, there is no relationship given here, right, between these two tables. Let me give you that, and let me take here, set a new relationship, and I'm going to set it to sales data and customer key. And if I select it, the destination table of newly created relationship has no primary key defined. Would you like to define a logical primary key? What it is saying is that, I mean, as mentioned in the wizard, that the destination table should be your dimension table, but by mistake, I have given it in the reverse order. And if you see here, I selected no. If you see here, always remember the blind mark, the tip of the arrow should be always on your dimension table. If the relationship can be given between two tables, right? So among those two tables, which one is your fact table and which one is your dimension table? The arrow mark, the tip of the arrow mark should say, I mean, should be pointing always on the dimension table. Here I've given it in the reverse place, right? I mean reverse order. So in that case, you can use this button just to reverse it. So now the relationship is in correct direction. It should always flow from sales data to customer. This is dimension. So what it means is all the sales information will roll up to the customer information. That means one customer here will have hundreds of records here. All the hundreds of records will be rolled up, will be summed and rolled up to give the customer one single customer sales. Like that, there will be millions of records which will be rolled up for each customer. So this is the transactional data. Here there will be one record for a customer. Here there will be many records. Those many records of one customer will roll up and give the information about a single customer, or sales about a single customer, or profit by a single customer. Now let's revisit the, let's discuss about the refresh option. What refresh will do? Let me click on refresh and see if it is going to do. There it is saying that no changes have been found. So the main advantage of refresh option is, let me go here, MS Paint. And by now you should understand, you should have some idea about the data source view and the database. This is your database where you will have all the objects, which means it can be a table or a view, and the relationship between those is given by the users. Now the data source view, on the other hand, is a layer on top of it. So it pulls some objects from here and it creates new columns into the objects, like using the new named calculation, and also it creates a new named queries based on one or two tables here, right? So now let's say this is an object, this is a table, this is a table, and I have one more view here which is pulled directly from the data source. And if I modify the structure of the table here, then how can I reflect it in my data source view? Let's say there are 20 columns, okay? And I pulled all those 20 columns into my data source view and I created the cube and it's all working fine. After a few months, users added 2 more columns to the table. So there are total 22 columns in the customer, and users want those 2 columns to be pulled into the queue. One option is to replace it with the named query. This is already named query. Let me go. Replace it with the named query, or if it is already a named query, you can edit it and you can add those 2 new columns and click on OK. That will pull those columns if it is a named query, and if it is a table, you have to replace it with the named query and then add those 2 columns. What if users, what if you don't want to go with named query? How can you get all the schema changes? There is one dumbest way of doing that. That is, delete this table and add this table again. So if you do that, all the objects that are created on top of this, for example, if you create a dimension using this table, the dimension will go invalid. If you create some relationships using this table, that will go invalid. Everything will be screwed up. So the best option is refresh. If you refresh, if you select refresh, what it will do is it will go and check the schema between these two. It will go here and check the schema, and first it will take the tables that are used in this one, only tables, okay, or views, not the named queries. And it will take those objects and it will go to the SQL Server or any underlying database on which you are building the cube, and it will compare. Okay, dim customer, what columns are there? Oh, all the columns are there. Nothing has been changed, so we are good. So now dim employee, everything is there. Two columns are added, newly added. So bring those two columns, and it will apply. It will publish that report here, and it's your wish to either apply or reject. Let me show you one quick example. For example, I will add to city. Select star from dimension.city. So this is the table. I'm adding a new column. I don't remember the SQL concepts. Alter table, table name, add. The column name is dummy. Type is 1. Data type is integer. Default 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me add this and see. Okay, the command worked fine. And if I execute this table, there should be a column at the end, dummy, and the default set to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if any new row is inserted and the value is not passed to the dummy, it will take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now there is a new column added. Let's see how it works if I try to use the option refresh. When I click refresh, it's saying that a dummy, a column in the city.dimension, which is an object from the data source, has a new column added. And if I can cancel it, which means it will not do anything, or if I select OK, that will be pulled into the object without having any impact on the objects like dimensions and the cubes that you have created. So it will not touch any of those. It works, it just pulls the information and it applies that. Now let me alter the table and drop the column. Drop column. I think I have to delete something before that. See, I have to delete this particular default constraint I created on it. This is the pain. Drop constraint. Is it right? Anyone good in SQL? Okay, this is the right spelling. So one second, this is why I hate SQL. I'm trying to drop this column and it's saying the dependency there, dummy failed. The object, let me go here. Yeah, I hate this. I don't use this so frequently and I am not getting the syntax. If it is not constraint, why the hell it is here? Okay, let me delete the constraint from here. And now try to delete the column. It dropped the column, and if I go here and if I execute the table, you will not see the particular column at the end. Now if I go and select the refresh here, you see a report generated. City dimension has a missing column, that is dummy, which is not there, which is deleted at the source, but you still have it. In this case, you have to select OK, and the column will be taken off from here. So the refresh will give you, the problem with the refresh is it is either full or null. For example, if you select this refresh option, okay, and if it has 10 changes, you have to take all the changes or you can ignore all the changes. There is no option like, okay, pick only these 3 or changes and ignore the 7 changes. No such option. You have to get everything. That is the biggest problem here. Let's say 2 guys are working on the cube project and one person added 3 columns and you added 7 columns. You need only those 7 columns for your cube to, for you to make the changes. but you can't pick like that. You have to pick either full or null, but it's not going to harm if you include full. So there is the option refresh. It's a very frequently used, not frequently, but very important option and very important interview question too. So this is completely about the data source view. If you define the data source view, let me delete this relationship. I don't want to define it properly. If you define the data source view properly, then very important piece of work in the cube development is done. Okay, we're done with the data source view. What is the next step? Per the order, per the spreadsheet order, per the folder order, if you see the next step is cubes, you have to create the cubes. But if you want to create the cubes, you need to have the dimensions handy. If you use this option to create the cube using the existing tables, it creates the dimensions for you, but I would recommend to go with the option create an empty cube. So for that, if you go with the option create an empty cube, and you need to select the data source view, click on next and finish. It will create an empty cube. There will be nothing. Wild word import as dw.cub is the cube name, and it's saying no measures. Measures is nothing but the collection of metrics, and dimensions, no dimensions are there. That's why the red mark is showing. So instead, this error will be there and it's irritating. I hate that. Instead of that, what I prefer to do is I go and create the dimensions first, and then I'll come back to the cube designing. So let's see with the dimension design, and I'll show you the disadvantage of not defining the proper data source view. One of the disadvantage or one of the manual work that you have to do. So let me create a new dimension. So you're creating the dimensions now, which means by which you want to see the data, by which dimensionality you want to see the data, or how you want to see the data. The facts are what data you want to see. The dimensions are how you want to see the data. Okay. Now this gives you a brief about it. Use this wizard to create the new dimensions. You first select a data source view and tables for the dimensions, and then set its properties. You can also opt to build a dimension without using an underlying data source. We'll discuss everything here. Click on next. You have a couple of options here. Use an existing table, which means existing table from the data source view, whatever you have picked. Generate a timetable in the data source. This is a beautiful option. And generate a timetable on the server. This creates on the server. This won't create on the data source. And generate a non-timetable in the data source. So we'll discuss each option. The first one is the most, out of 100 dimensions you create, 99 will be using the first option. Use an existing table, and the remaining one can be into any of these categories. Let me click on next. Now I'm going to create dimension for customer. So I have to select the table customer, and the data source view will say which data source view I have to use to get to create this dimension. And when I select the customer, you see a difference. It is asking me to select the key column. Let's say customer key is the key column, and select the name column. Okay. Now instead of customer, let me select city info. I'm pretty sure city info has a primary key defined. If I go to city info, it is selecting these two columns by default, city key and city key. So a small thing that you have missed here in the data source view, or it's not basically a missed, it's something that is not defined in the data source, and you ignored or you have not given importance to add it here. That is the primary key. If you know this is the primary key, set it. Now if I go to create a new dimension, and if I select the same customer, I don't need to do the job. So it's going to save me 2 steps while creating the dimensions if I set the primary keys properly. So this is why I mentioned data source view. When you define the data source view properly, it's going to help you in when you create the future further objects like dimensions and the facts as part of the cube designing. Now it saved 1 step if I have the primary key defined here. I can ignore it, but only problem is I have to know what is the primary key and I have to select on my own. Click on next. So it's saying these are the available attributes. Attributes are nothing but the columns in the dimension table. It's asking me to pick what I want. So let's say, for example, I need these attributes, postal code. I don't need valid from lineage key. I need derived name. Let's see how it looks. Click on next, and it's asking me to specify the name of the dimension, and it has given the preview of the dimension here. Click on finish. So now the dimension is created. This is what the dimension is and how we define the dimension. And it has many options like creating hierarchies, and you will have attribute relationships pane, and you'll have translations, and you'll have browser option. We will see all those options in the next session. For now, we will stop it here. And this is how you can create the dimensions, pretty straightforward. Select the table and select the primary key, which column will uniquely identify a row in the table, and click next and select all the attributes and select finish. Then that creates your dimension. So in next session, we'll be discussing about very important things like build, deploy, and how to deploy the project, and what is the role of the service, SQL Server Analysis Services service. What will happen if this is not running and when you try to deploy. And also we will see how to what is the hierarchies and what is the attribute relationships, translations, and so on in the next session. And also we will cover all the properties that we have. Not all. If I have to cover all, it will go for 20 days. The most important properties here, and what are the most important properties on attributes, and there are few important properties on the key column. This is the key column. So we will be discussing about all those concepts in the next session. Thank you, guys.